So it really turns out the HTML part really wasn't all that bad, right? So now we can actually write some CSS. So if you look at your files panel, you'll see a file called Writing CSS.html. Let's go ahead and open that. Now our page is just a little bit more structured than it was. It should look very similar, not exactly the same as our Writing HTML, but very similar to it. So we've got a little bit of content here. We've got a header area, we have some content, and a sidebar and a footer. If I take a look at my code, you'll see that I have a class style called container that is wrapped around the entire page. So if I come back over here to my design view, I put my cursor in here anywhere, notice that my tag inspector really allows me to select exactly what I want. So I'll select that, and I see that it is indeed wrapped around all of my content. So if I go back over to my code view, I see then I've got a div called content. Now this is very important to notice kind of where these are at inside of our structure. So because my content is above my sidebar, it's going to need to have a float to it, because anything that is floated needs to be above anything that is not. And then we have our footer. So both of our sidebar and our content are both going to have a float to it. And then we need to be able to clear that float at the end to make sure that our footer doesn't move along to the side of everything else. Let me just write this over again here. Let's say we don't have a div there at all for around my footer. So here I would start typing DI, and then it should already take me to div. And as soon as I type in my space bar, then it gives me my code hints as to what I can do with that particular tag. So this is going to be a class style, and as soon as I start typing C, it takes me over to class style. And I don't have a style sheet attached to this, so nothing looks right at the moment. So now I'm going to just type footer. Now one big distinction here as I just typed that. So you'll notice that we have class styles so far, but nothing has a dot in front of it. So when we were writing our CSS before using our CSS panels and our properties inspector, then we were putting a dot in front of it. The only other time that we didn't do that was when we used our insert menu and chose to wrap our items around a div tag in that fashion. And it knows that it's a class style, it knows that it needs that dot in front of it to actually be a class style, so I don't have to put one in here inside of my code. And then all I have to do is close that off. So you'll see a pattern here so far that most things that I open, I then have to close. So let's go back over to our design view, and we'll go ahead and attach a style sheet that we can then work with. So I'm going to click on the Attach Style Sheet button over in my CSS panels. I'm going to browse, and I'm going to choose Writing.css, which is located in the CSS folder, which is in the Assets folder inside your Chapter 9 project folder. Again, even though we are adding this to just a page that we're just working with, it's not going to be live, keep in mind you want to choose your media type in the end. So what is this particular style sheet going to be for? Is it going to be just what it shows like it looks like on the screen? Or is it going to be for print or projection, etc.? So I'm just going to choose screen, so that way if I finally end up with a page that I want to actually use, then I already have the correct media type for it. So I'm going to click OK. And I see a little bit of change, but let's take a look at the code itself. Either I can go into split view and see the CSS and the design view at the same time, or I can right click on this and choose to open this in its own separate file. So let's see this in split view, and then I will click on just the Writing CSS. And this is really so incredibly handy to be able to go back and forth from my related files view to the content of my page itself and see in design view and how this changes immediately. Now we don't have anything all that exciting going on in our CSS other than that we have our body written. So that I have a margin of 0, a padding of 0, And I've got my font size and my font family already decided, and the color in my page. I've just got a dark gray. So now we need to define for the container. So for instance, if you want to make sure and know how to write that, I'm just going to get rid of that container one and we'll just write that ourselves. So I just put a dot so that I know that it's going to be a class style. So it is going to be container. And now I need an open brace and a closed brace. And now I can put my information inside of here. So if I hit my return key, once I am inside of that top left curly brace, then I immediately get my code hints for my CSS. So what might I want that to look like? So we're going to make this into a fairly simple math-wise container. So I need to define a width for it. This is my outside container. Once I type width, I see my code hints pop up, I find that, and I just hit my enter or return to apply that. So this isn't going to be auto itself. My width is going to be an actual value. And if I'm going to use ems, remember ems and percentages are the only really true relative measure. So if my end user did a control plus or a command plus, then they would be able to increase both the font size and the container size at the same time. So everything scales accordingly, which is really what I want in the end. So since I chose my font size to be 62.5, that's basically the same as 10 pixels. So it makes it a whole lot easier to make those M measurements. So I'm going to choose 80 M. And how I end my sentence. So I have my property and then its value. Container is the rule. So since I chose 80, now that's basically going to be the same size as about 800 pixels wide. So now I can hit my enter or return, and I can decide what I want that to then look like. So let's make it centered. So to center that container, I need to give it a margin. And I can give it either a margin left or just a margin right. But let's see how we can write this shorthand-wise. So I see that I've got margin in there. And the way when I write shorthand works with anything that has a top, left, right, and bottom is that it goes in a clockwise fashion. So if I'm going to write this, I don't want any margin at the top, then I write 0, and then my left and my right is going to be auto so that it is centered in the page. If I really wanted to do some shorthand, that's really all I basically need, because then both of those repeat. I want 0 at the very top and I want 0 at the very bottom of my page. I don't want that container to have any margin on it. And I want it to be centered in my page, so I need just an auto. And that's actually going to work perfectly. Now let's make sure we can actually see that. So I'm going to give that a little bit of a border. And I'm going to give it solid. And that is going to be a 1 pixel. And it's then going to have a color to it, because we need all three of those things. Well, let's just give it something simple so we can actually see it. And then I close that off. Now the header, go ahead and put your cursor inside of there, and we'll go ahead and style that. Actually, let's go back and hit your return key. It's a whole lot easier just having that code hints just pop right up for you. So we're just going to give it a height so we can see it. And let's say 10M for my height. And let's just give it a color. And I'm going to make this as ugly as I can just to show where all the sections are. So now if I refresh and actually apply this, you see that I've given that a color. Now, if I want to make sure and give that a background color, and now if I refresh that, I have that as a background color instead of just the text being that color. So it's pretty easy once you decide that you're writing some CSS that you can make that look really however you want. It's pretty simple.